Have you ever woken up and felt like the weight of the entire world was pressing down on your chest? Every email, every deadline, every expectation screaming for your attention, and you just can't move. Today, you're about to witness what happens when someone pushes themselves past the point of exhaustion and how they find the courage to simply breathe. This is Mark's story. The alarm clock shattered the silence at 5 a.m. It did not stop. It cut through the room, a sharp, rhythmic demand that refused to be ignored. Mark stared at the ceiling, his eyes tracing the cracks in the plaster, while the sound vibrated through the mattress. His hands moved toward the nightstand, but they did not move with purpose. They shook. He reached for the phone, his fingers grazing the cold glass screen as the device pulsed with incoming notifications. 3 unread emails from his boss sat at the top of the queue, each one a weight pressing down on his chest. He turned his head and looked at the desk across the room. A stack of unpaid bills sat there, the edges curled and yellowing under the dim light. He did not sit up. He did not reach for his glasses. He simply watched the numbers on the screen change, each minute ticking away like a countdown. The dread was not a thought. It was a physical presence in the room, thick and suffocating, anchoring him to the bed. He tried to push himself up. His palms pressed into the mattress, his muscles coiled, and he prepared to swing his legs over the side of the bed. It was a simple, mechanical action he had performed thousands of times before, but this time, the command did not reach his limbs. His legs felt like lead, dense and immovable, as if they were fused to the frame of the bed. He strained, his jaw tightening until his teeth ached, but his knees refused to bend. The effort left him breathless, his chest heaving. 6 months of 14-hour days had finally caught up to him. Every missed meal, every skipped night of sleep had been a debt. He pushed again, harder, his shoulders trembling with the exertion, but his body remained anchored to the sheets. He was not just tired, he was broken. The realization settled over him, cold and absolute. He could not stand. He could not walk. He could not start the day. He collapsed back onto the pillow, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps as the weight of his own exhaustion pinned him down. The clock on the wall ticked forward, marking the minutes he was supposed to be elsewhere. Somewhere across the city, the meeting had started. He imagined the conference room and the expectant faces. He did not move to stop it. He did not reach for his phone to offer an excuse. Instead, he pulled his hands up and buried his face in his palms, the skin pressing against his fingers. The silence in the room deepened, becoming a physical barrier between him and the world outside. He felt the weight of those responsibilities stacking up in the corners of the room like shadows. They were pressing against his ribs, making every breath a conscious, difficult effort. He stayed there, motionless. The morning light shifted, crawling across the floorboards, but he remained in the dark, listening to the clock. The phone on the nightstand erupted. It vibrated against the wood, a sharp, rhythmic stuttering that cut through the silence of the room. Mark turned his head. The screen lit up, displaying a cascade of unread emails and urgent pings. His boss, the project lead, the pending deadlines. Each notification was a digital tether, pulling at him, demanding an immediate response. He reached out, his hand hovering over the device. The vibration was frantic, a desperate, artificial energy that felt entirely alien to the stillness of his body. He watched the light pulse against his palm. He did not tap the screen. He did not read the messages. Instead, he gripped the edges of the phone, his fingers white against the casing, and lifted it from the surface. The buzzing continued, a persistent, mechanical plea for his attention. He held it for a heartbeat, feeling the frantic energy thrumming through his skin, and then he turned it over. He pressed the screen firmly against the carpet. The vibration muffled instantly, turning into a dull, rhythmic thud against the floorboards. The room went quiet again. He pulled his hand back. Mark stood up. His legs felt heavy, but he forced himself to walk toward the kitchen. The floorboards were cool beneath his bare feet, He reached the sink, turned the handle, and watched the water fill a glass. It was a simple, mundane action, yet it felt like a monumental effort. He stood there, waiting. He expected the phone to erupt again, or for the front door to rattle with the force of someone demanding his presence. He waited for the inevitable collapse of his world, the crushing weight of his failure to materialize in the doorway. But the house remained silent. He carried the glass to the living room and sat down on the floor. He did not check his messages. He did not plan the next project. He simply sat. The sunlight had shifted, creating a long, golden beam that stretched across the room. He watched the dust motes dance in that light, swirling in slow, chaotic patterns. He tracked them with his eyes, one by one, for 2 hours. The silence was not empty. It was heavy, a vacuum where his anxiety used to live. He breathed in, then out, waiting for the disaster that never arrived. The void was terrifying, yet he did not move. He remained anchored in the stillness. By noon, the sun had climbed high, casting sharp shadows across the porch. Mark stepped through the doorway, his movements fluid and unhurried. He sat on the wooden bench, bracing himself for the inevitable fallout of his absence. He expected to hear the distant sirens of his life crashing down, or to see the street filled with the consequences of his silence. He waited. A neighbor walked a dog past the house, the animal sniffing at the grass. With rhythmic, casual interest, the neighbor waved, a simple gesture, and kept walking. Mark watched them disappear around the corner. The world had not collapsed. It was still turning, indifferent to his missed meetings and unread emails. He reached out and pressed his palm against the wooden railing. The grain was rough, weathered by the elements, and cool to the touch. He traced the jagged edge of a splinter, feeling the sharp, grounding reality of the wood. Under his fingertips, it was solid. It was real. He gripped the railing, feeling the stability of the structure beneath his weight. The panic that had defined his morning began to recede, replaced by a strange, quiet clarity. He leaned back, the wood pressing firmly against his spine. The air on the porch felt different now. It was not just oxygen, it was space. Mark sat motionless, his hands resting flat on his knees. He felt a tightness in his shoulders, a knot that had been pulling at his muscles for months, and he made a choice. He did not reach for his phone. He did not scan the horizon for problems. He focused entirely on his own lungs. He began to draw in a breath, slow and deliberate. He pulled the air deep into his chest, feeling his ribs expand against the resistance of his own tension. He continued until he could hold no more. He held it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The pressure in his chest was not the familiar ache of anxiety, but the physical sensation of fullness. It was a weight he had chosen to carry, and in that moment, he realized he could set it down. He exhaled. The breath left him in a long, steady stream. As the air left his body, the tension in his shoulders dropped. The suffocating pressure that had defined his existence for half a year began to dissolve. He was not fixed, and the future remained a blank, unwritten page. But the crushing grip of his own demands had finally loosened. He sat in the quiet. The silence of the afternoon was no longer an enemy. It was a space he had earned. Mark pushed himself up from the bench, his joints popping, the movements slow and deliberate. He walked back into the house, his feet padding softly against the floorboards. He bypassed the desk. He did not glance at the stack of bills or the laptop screen that had been his master for months. He went straight to the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator, the cool air washing over his face, and reached for a piece of fruit. He held it in his hand, feeling the weight and the smooth, cold skin of it. He took a bite, the juice, sharp and sweet. Outside, the world continued to spin, but the urgency was gone. He looked at the phone lying face down on the counter. He turned his back on the device. The emails could wait. He was simply existing, choosing the quiet rhythm of his own life. The house was still. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic ticking of a clock that no longer demanded his attention. Mark walked to the window and watched the late afternoon light stretch across the yard. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not have a plan for the projects he had left unfinished, nor did he have a solution for the bills waiting on his desk. But as he stood there, watching the dust motes drift in the golden light, he realized that the world had not collapsed because he stopped. The sky remained, the trees continued to sway, and he was still here. He had spent years running from a finish line that kept moving, but today, he had finally stepped off the track. He took another slow breath, feeling the air fill his lungs without the sharp sting of panic. He was not fixed, and he was not perfect, but he was no longer suffocating under the heavy burden of his own expectations. He turned away from the window and looked at the space he had created for himself. It was a small, quiet victory, but it was enough. If you are listening, and if you feel the same weight pressing down on your own chest, remember this: you are doing better than you think. You do not need to solve everything at once. You do not need to run until you break. Just breathe. Take the time you need to find your footing again. The world will wait. You are enough, exactly as you are in this moment. Just breathe and keep going.